Hey folks, Doc here. It's been a while. My bad. Life. Anyways, it's pretty damn chilly outside, and I have no desire to do anything at all except sit inside and hibernate and wait until spring. But I guess I owe you guys a video. You've been patient, and I've been slacking. I'm standing here inside the portable shelter I had to put up to kind of half-ass protect the RX-7 for the winter while I continue to tinker away at it. And it's pretty chilly outside. A lot of you guys have suffered this cold front that's come through and made places like Texas and Florida and Alabama a lot chillier than they should be. Yeah, my heart goes with you. I know what it's all about. Anyways, not a lot has been going on, but something is always happening, so I'll show you what I'm tinkering with right now. Stick around. This horrible white crap came to us last weekend, and I'm less than thrilled because I didn't have much prep time. I basically had enough time to get a weather report and go, oh crap, and put up that temporary shelter for the car. Anyways, this here is an acquisition that I made recently, and I'm going to tell you about it. Alright, so what I have here is I forget the year, Boland's QS16. And the QS16 is very, very similar to the QT16. I'll get to the differences in a minute. And funny little story attached to this one. Whole bunch of years ago, some friends of my ex-wife had this thing. And I had for a while a very similar one. I'll get back to that in a second. And I always told them, you know, if you want to sell that thing, let me know. And here we are, you know, 5, 6, 7 years later. Her friend calls me up and says, hey, you still play with tractors? And I said, yeah. And she says, well, you always said that if we were ready to sell this thing, let you know. And I said, yeah. And she says, we're ready to sell this thing. So I got it for a hell of a deal. This is probably the 7th or 8th time something like this has happened. So the lesson here that I want you guys to know is if you know somebody or you've seen somebody or even at the side of the road, you know, a machine or something that's not necessarily for sale that you're interested in, you know, don't give up hope. Let them know that you're interested. You know, don't pester them, but let them know you're interested. And one day they might just let you know. This has happened to me a bunch of times. This is the most recent case. Anyways, back to the tractor. So on its own, these are some pretty stout garden tractors. 16 horsepower engine, shaft drive, hydrostatic. One of the biggest, beefiest damn hydro units I've ever seen. That's all iron. It's heavy as hell. And the one that I had, which was a QT16, and I'll explain the difference in a minute, when I parted it, I sold the rear end for $300. Just the rear end. And the way that story went is an old landlord of mine had this QT16, and the engine had been swapped out to the Briggs & Stratton 18 horsepower Vanguard V-twin that you people have seen in Mule 2 and Suburban Commando, and that's why I really wanted that tractor, because that V-twin engine. Anyways, the difference between the QS16 and the QT16 is very much similar to the difference between the Sears Suburban SS16 and ST16, and it's all engine. Everything else is identical. The Boland's QT16 had the twin. Think it was an Onan, but it's been a while. Could have been a Briggs. Twin cylinder opposed 16 horsepower engine. And the QS16, S being single, comes with a 16 horsepower K341 Kohler. Yeah, that's why I got this thing. So y'all remember Winston? I might do a cold start on this thing. And Winston is a Cub Cadet 1000, which means it's got a 10 horse Kohler in it. And although it does run well, it smokes like a chimney, so I was looking at rebuilding the engine. And that's when that Boland's dropped into my lap. So I'm going to pull the engine out of the Boland's, put it in this thing so I can get a power upgrade while I'm turning off the mosquito repellent. I just grabbed my tripod. I'm going to set it down in a second because I thought, what the heck, let's do that. Let's do a cold start on this thing, because as smoky as it is, it usually starts up pretty sweet for me, and you can kind of tell by looking at it. I haven't touched this thing in a while. It's all white and covered in snow and junk. So this will give us a true cold start. It is, well, let's see, in American, I'm going to say it's 27, 28 degrees right now. It's a little chilly. But let's see what happens to her. I don't even know if the battery's got a charge, but what the hell, choke on, throttle up. I think we're still in neutral. Let's see what happens. Oh boy, there we go. Too much choking, not enough throttle. I got a nasty suspicion I just ran it out of gas. I know it was low. Okay, so yeah, that was your 10 seconds of running with no gas in it. Anyways, back on topic. Alright, so here we are back to this Boland's QS16, and I did get it really cheap, but there's a reason that I did. Let's open the hood up and have a look at that Kohler, minus some additional junk that doesn't generally belong with the engine, including a couple of valve lapping sticks and a little container valve lapping compound. And the reason that I've got that there is I'm in the process of putting new valves in it. When I got this thing, it was disassembled, as you see here, without the valves in it. I hate getting things disassembled because now you're trying to scramble to find parts and stuff. But basically what had happened was it had bent valves. And the story that I got was that somebody dropped a screw down the carburetor and it bounced around and got inhaled and, well, did some mangling. Anyways, I was on eBay recently, picked up a set of valves. Hold on. A little bit of dust and dirt in the piston there. Anyways, looking at the piston, you can see a couple of ding marks in it, although it doesn't look that bad. I don't think it was a particularly big screw. And I know this isn't going to show well on camera, but try and get that piston down a little bit more, turn the shaft, and just kind of stare into the bore for a minute. And it doesn't actually look all that bad. So the hope here is that I can get these valves installed, and right now they're just sitting in there. Get these valves installed and you know, see if I can fire it over on a squirt of gas or ether or something like that to just generally assess the overall condition of the motor before I get any further. This seems like one of those moments where I can offer you a tech tip. So these little valve retainers, the keepers, can be a real pain in the butt to install sometimes because they don't want to stay put until the spring's actually holding them in place. So one of the coolest things you can do is just apply a little bit of grease to it. And I got a little bit of grease on the outside too, so I can kind of stick it to my finger and offer it up into place. And boom, there it is where it should be. Grab the other one. Actually keep this grease on my desk inside for working on RC stuff. Doesn't matter what grease you use really, as long as it's oil soluble, and it's gonna get washed out once the engine oil starts circulating. And get that thing to kind of lock in there. You know it when it goes in place because you feel it kind of click into the groove. And now that that is where it needs to be, I can start releasing the spring compressor. Another tech tip I can give you is trying to wangle those springs in there can be a little difficult, especially if you got cold fingers or fat fingers. And if you watch certain automotive shows, you might call that a dead animal on the highway cable tie second. You all know what I'm talking about. That's a great show and a bunch of great guys with some great tips. Anyways, you can wrap a couple of zip ties on there, snug that spring up real tight, tuck it in, and then cut the zip ties. And that's exactly what I did here, but the camera was charging. It's cold out here, so the battery doesn't last long. Alright, so I've got the valves installed properly, and just going to grab the engine shaft and just rotate it through and see what happens. And it would appear that the valves are working correctly, which is great. So the next thing I'm going to do is install the cylinder head. One of the things that I really appreciate about these Kohler engines is the fact that even the flatheads have adjustable tappets. So setting the valve lash, unlike a Briggs, doesn't mean having to, you know, grind and file away at the valve stem or get a new one and then re-grind and file away in order to achieve the correct lash specification. The tappet has flats on it that you grab with a wrench. I don't know how well you can see this action. And then there's a adjustable, basically a bolt head on it. And you just essentially wind the bolt in or out to set the lash as you need it. So I'm doing that right now. Alright, there we go, that feels good. So I installed the cylinder head, and sometimes I have these moments of brilliance where I say, hey, you know what, I'm smart. And then I have these moments where sometimes I wonder how I get through the day without drooling on my shirt. And one of those moments was me failing to order some gaskets that I needed for this, because I just had like a blonde moment, and some of the gaskets that I need I do not have, so I had to recycle the head gasket for one thing, which I'm not a big fan of doing, but it's something that I had to do. I'm not going to worry too much about all that stuff right now, because right now is kind of an assessment thing where I'm just going to test to see if the engine is going to build enough compression to run like this, or if I'm going to have to dig in further and, you know, hone the cylinder, get new piston rings, maybe a piston, I don't know, because I did see a little bit of cylinder wall damage. Not a hell of a lot, but some. So basically I'm going to bang this thing together, do a compression test, and then check for spark and see if I can get it to fire up at least momentarily. So I'm going to put this breather back together again as best I can. And this is part of the reason that I had to go find a nut and stuff. And I hate getting basket cases because hardware is like always missing when people tear crap apart and then sell you a box of parts. So there's a PSA. If there's something wrong with some crap and you've taken it apart and decided that you're no longer interested and you're going to sell it on, put it back together again, at least loosely, for crying out loud. Okay, rant over. Alright, so one of the things that I did not receive in my box of parts, shock of all shocks, with the ignition key, and it's not one of those normal crappy INDAC keys. So I'm going to have to do some hot wiring in order to do an ignition test. In the meantime, I want to do a compression check, so I've got my little booster pack hooked up to the starter. And I put a little oil down the cylinder. Probably could have used some more, but I put a little down there because everything's kind of dry. And obviously that's not going to give me the best compression result, that's for sure. So we're going to hold the throttle open and give it a crank and see what happens. Well, it sounds like my booster pack is kind of low, and it's only registering about 55 or 60 psi, which is kind of low, but then again it's cranking slowly, and it's just really hard to say whether that's actually going to be sufficient. wants to run. Okay, so some tuning is required, and obviously you just saw a lot of oil and grunge and crap burning off of it. And I would imagine some of that's the breather leaking, yep, because I needed a gasket there. But it does run. That's a plus. Okay, so obviously I still have to go over some stuff with this engine. Carburetor is flooding its guts out, and that's partially why it's being so hesitant to start and run. Although I did have the camera off and I gave it another crank and it lit, so I punched the button on the camera just to show you, okay, it's running. Need some gaskets. I kind of want to put on a new head gasket, and you can see where the oil was leaking from around that breather because the breather gasket is not in terrific order. So carburetor, some gaskets, some final tuning. I want to go over the valve lash settings again now that things are probably a little bit better seated, and we'll go from there. But the positive side is the engine looks like it's going to be a runner, so we're happy with that. So thanks for tuning into Sprocket's Garage on YouTube, and until next time, take care of yourself. Oh, shit, are you kidding?